Okay, we're rolling here now. This is my father, Kenneth Franklin White, named after Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His father is Mahonri Kenneth White. And of course, this is Eric Edward White. And what we wanted to do is just interview him and see if we can get some information and get a feel for my grandpa, his dad, as well as my grandma, his mother, that obviously they passed on and we don't have the opportunity to videotape them, and you know, get a feel for their life and who they were and what they did, and kind of their life story. So we're asking him, and what we'd like to know is
first of all, I'm a Democrat.
First thing you want to be known for.
Sound good.
First thing you want to be known for.
It's election year, you know.
What is the year? It's September 2004. September 2004. Tell us about Grandpa. We know that a lot of history and story is written in the White Family album. Of course, he's the one that compiled that book and has written a certain amount in there already. But
well, it hasn't changed.
it hasn't changed. So tell us what your fondest memories of him when you were a boy that you think would be interesting to be told.
Well, the family came originally from Boston, England, which the White family book would say.
And that's Edward White, right?
Edward White, and he came and he migrated over to this country from Boston. And years ago, I went with my folks to see where he migrated from. A pretty humble street.
Yeah.
And it was a seaside situation, and they were fishermen by trade. And by reading the history in the White family book, you'll understand and know the particulars of that part of the history. I don't think I need to do that again. But
No. Some things, if you want to just
anyway, there was
summarize, keep short, but then tell stories more about his particular life.
He received a land grant from Ulysses S. Grant, what we call the
president just after President Lincoln.
Yeah, but it was about like a city block. I believe it was 40 acres, something like that. In those days, that was what they did, is they gave you could get a land grant, and if you build a house and put it to beneficial use, you could have the ground. And that's what he did, and that's how I came here. And that's my great-grandfather. And my grandfather, he built right next to a house on Kenwood Street. I forget the address, but it's approximately
Now this is southeast of Sugar House, right?
Southeast of Sugar House. There was nothing out there as a child. I remember nothing being around except big fields. It was very much a very rural situation.
Yeah.
So some of the things that I remember are during that rural time. Right now, as of this date, it's quite built up and developed. And
what would that be? That's 20, about 30th south?
Well, my dad's house was 2901 South Kenwood.
Okay, so 30th south roughly.
Yeah, and my grandfather's house was about 3 or 4 houses south of that. which would make it, what, 20 or 3100 South
Right.
Kenwood.
And it's on the east side of the road, I remember that. And it's between,
That's what we call the White family block.
yeah,
And on each of the corners was each of the sons. There was my dad, being the oldest of the brothers, was on one corner. It was on the northwest corner, and then there was Arnold that was on the northeast corner, and then there was Connie Moss, Connie and Grant Moss
okay.
was on the other. And then, of course, my grandfather and the homestead, and all of it was called basically the White Block. And that's what I remember as a child.
And the
Like growing
original
up.
Pioneer home still sits there on Boston Lane.
As of right now, as of this date, it's still there. It has a plaque on it now, and it's designated as, I forget exactly what it is, but in the White family book it would say and have a picture of it.
Right.
And
Is that where Grandpa was born? Was he born there, or was he born in the hospital?
I don't know. I can't say for sure. I don't know where he was born.
Okay. What are some of your favorite?
Well,
Fondest memories
Mom
of the
came
White
from, her maiden name was Sparks, and she was quite proud of that name. And about wherever you look on photographs or anything, it was always Ada Marie Sparks White, because she felt it was important that your maiden name
Be identified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
I still do that.
she doesn't remember, I don't remember her dad, and I don't think she does that much either, or did. She's passed on now, but she doesn't remember much because her dad was killed by an automobile. Got hit by a car. The story, as I remember it, the fellow was eating an ice cream cone and hit him, and he went to the hospital, and at the hospital they couldn't identify him. He didn't have any ID on him. And so Mom always stressed that we always carry ID with us, because that had happened to her dad. And he didn't get medical attention like he would have, maybe, is the way she felt.
Where did he live? Did they live in, this wasn't Nephi, was it?
Well, mother was born, I believe, in Nephi, as she was raised as a little girl in Nephi, and then she moved up to Salt Lake City. Who she stayed with, I don't know. But she grew, as a young girl, she grew up in Nephi. And it was kind of fun all the time. We would go through there. It's a very little town. To this day, it's a very little town, farming town. And we used to kid her a little bit about being from Nephi, a little place. But anyway, she moved up to Salt Lake, and she worked for the See's Candy Company.
Why not?
See's Candy Company. And that was her job, her first job. And one of the stories I remember, when she was dating my dad.
Now they knew each other in high school, right?
Huh?
They knew each other in high school? They went to Granite High School?
Oh, yeah, I think it was probably high school there. The old stories about it being a long walk to school all the time. I got my stories, and it was a long walk for me. and it was really a long walk for my dad. And much like yours, Eric, would be a long walk for you, where you were raised. But,
And it was Granite High School though, right?
Granite High School.
You went to school at Libby Edwards,
I went to Libby Edwards.
which was off of 30, is that 33rd South?
It was on roughly Imperial and 33rd South.
Okay, and Granite High School's like 7th East or something, right?
Yeah, it's down 33rd South, farther west, a couple miles, almost a couple miles down there. So it was quite a ways. And you have to remember, back in those days, they used horse and buggies a lot, horses. And my father, he wasn't blessed like I am, where he was inherited any great wealth or anything. He was a self-made man. And he started out as the letter carrier, and where that came from was my grandfather retired as a letter carrier.
That's right.
For the United States Post Office. And
You know, I've ran into people that knew him, and he asked. And they said,
well, his route, you have to understand what his route was. It was not a full-time route. He was an alternate mailman, and an alternate mailman meant that when it was too snowy, too rainy, or too whatever, and it was miserable, the regular mailman would call in sick, and then Dad would have to take the route and the mail would get through, so to speak.
And he
But he delivered mail all the way.
He was the postmaster, wasn't he? Your grandpa was also the postmaster.
I believe he was. I
Yeah,
believe
'cause
he.
that's what the older lady came up to me. She goes, "Now, Mr. White was a postmaster there in Sugar House or somewhere."
I believe that's true.
Yeah.
He retired as postmaster. Yeah, postmaster.
Yeah.
Anyway, my dad's route was from the what we call the point of the mountain, or the prison. I don't know if the prison was there at the time, but where the prison is now, the original prison was in Sugar House,
Right.
what we call Sugar House Park.
Where the high school, Highland High School used to be. Highland High School sits on that spot, or close to it anyway.
East of where the old prison was. And the
Okay.
old prison
Oh, okay.
looked very much, I remember the old prison wall. And I was quite small. But the only reason I bring up the prison part is that if out at where the prison is now, out at the point of the mountain, that was where Dad's route started. And it ended at the St. Mary's of the Wasatch, which is 10 miles of horse and buggy type driving to deliver the mail.
Take you all day.
Now there wasn't a lot of houses, but they were strung out. But it was a great deal of distance, is what I'm trying to say. And
Now this is what didn't Grandpa help? My grandpa helped my great grandpa on that route, right? At
well,
times.
it wasn't my grandfather's route. It was just a post office, a postal worker's route. And anyway, he raised the family. I was the baby of the family by 10 years. And I'm the only one with red hair. It's not red anymore. It's a little gray now. But used to have fun kidding Mom about that, as you can imagine. But anyway, Dad raised his family on that, and he had a love for flowers, and he liked to raise flowers. he was at one time one of the, not the, but one of the oldest florists in the state of Utah, called White Floral.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he was quite good at it. He liked it enough that he took it seriously, and so Miller Floral up in Bountiful wanted to hire him to get him pretty much out of the way, you know, to not necessarily merge, but keep him from competing with them. And but Dad would take flowers up on Broadway, some street up in Salt Lake on Broadway, and sell flowers up there. And that was the way he, you know, fed his family. So, self-made man. War came along. A lot of hard times during that siege in the 80s.
And he was around 20 or 21, 22 during the beginning of the Great Depression.
Yeah, probably.
I remember looking at it in 1929. He was like early 20s.
Yeah, I always wore a hat. You'll rarely ever see my dad without a hat. In those days, men wore hats, dress hats.
Even as an old man, I remember he always put the hat on.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
be it whether he was.
Me, I'll wear a ball cap or something like that, but who knows, watching this, what you're wearing now, but
He always had a hat rack next to his door too, with several.
that was the way it was done. You were not dressed, you were not considered a dressed person to go out the door without a hat on. When I say a dress hat, a regular dress hat, you've seen pictures, you'll see pictures of him, and rarely will you ever see him without a hat on.
Yeah.
Now, he was a little thin on top with his hair, but he had a full head of hair all the time, all of his life, but it was thinning towards the end.
So they met, Grandma and Grandpa, they met in high school, because I think they were dating when they were in high school, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And they graduated. Was she younger than him by like a year, or were they the same age?
Well, I don't know how much age difference there was, but one cute story that I remember, everybody used coal in those days to heat. Not everybody, but most people had a coal furnace. And to have a stoker was an oddity. So when I say heat, that would be heat as a house with a fireplace, with coal in it. And Dad used to like the nut coal, what they call the nut coal, and that nut coal was dipped in stove oil. And that stove oil helped the coal burn more affluently or more efficiently.
Right.
And Dad tried, I think my grandfather was trying to build a fire, and Mother offered, she says, well, I'll build that fire for you. And so she, instead of taking kindling, meaning wood, small pieces of wood, she just took rolls of newspaper, rolled them up into a tight ball, not a ball, but give it a twist.
Right.
She stuffed it in with the nut coal, and she lit the paper, and the coal would take off. And anyway, Grandfather was quite impressed with her, the fact she could get a fire going with just newspaper.
Well, that's the only way I've ever seen you build a fire, with newspaper.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think that's kind of caught on. Most of America does it that way now. So tell us about his personality. Just some insights of, you know, his temperament, what he liked, what he disliked, as well as Grandma, what she liked and disliked. Just kind of give us a little bit about their personality. What you recall that may be unique or funny or.
Dad was always he's all the time doing off the wall stuff. When I say that, I mean to give you an example, he went on a cruise one time and was on the Queen Mary. And the Queen Mary, as you know, as of this date right now, is tied up down in Long Beach, down in California.
Okay.
And it's on the Queen Mary, and they traveled over to Europe, and they have what they call crazy night,
Okay.
and you dress up in costumes, crazy. And he
I've seen-
took
so
his dress hat.
So that's where that photograph came from.
Yeah, he took his dress hat and he tipped it upside down with a brim on top
Is
instead of.
this a Jersey fruit photo? This the Jersey fruit photo?
Oh, he did this all the time. I'm telling you. I mean, he, I guess the one with the crab in the
I
hand
didn't see the crab. I just saw him with
and
a
the roll
Jersey fruit
and
crate.
he had
and ropes that would go over his shoulders.
this one I'm telling you about. He had his hat upside down. He had a crab up in the top, up
Okay.
where you would normally put your head.
Yeah.
And then he tied on strings, he tied, I would call them bagels, round bagels.
Okay.
He called them rolls, but they were round, and they had a hole in the center like donuts.
Yeah.
And his theme was, as I roll over the ocean. Anyway, he won the crazy night on the Queen Mary. Okay. And somewhere there's a photograph of that, but it's the one with a crab in it. He did a lot of crazy stuff, always off the wall. And
See, I only remember him as a pretty conservative, sitting in his
he had
chair.
fun. He had fun.
But see, and I can't recall too much of the fun side of it.
Well, that was.
He was older, obviously, and
You never live until you saw him put on a grass skirt and do the hula. I mean, it was all the swim. Want to go back? He'd put on his record. He went to Hawaii and on another ship.
yeah.
And he a cruise, and he lost my train of thought.
Put on the record.
He put on a
Yeah,
record.
yeah, he put on a record, Hawaiian record. My little grass shack. I want to go back to my little grass shack in Kealakuk, Hawaii.
Okay.
It's a grand old place that's always fair to see. And he would do this, come swimming to me and all that kind of stuff. But he would do those kinds of things, and it'd be pretty spontaneous. So he had fun, but yeah, it didn't leak out a lot. But I mean, most of the time he was pretty much a businessman. But he would have fun.
Tell us about Grandma. The stories I remember about Grandma, mostly is, she was very superstitious,
Oh yeah.
and she worried about Tommy knockers. You remember that? That's what I remember.
Oh, we don't even talk about that, especially on his tape. I don't want to talk about that.
So you're superstitious too.
Well, yeah, I'm still superstitious. Yeah. No, you didn't open an umbrella in the house. If you opened an umbrella in the house, you're in a mess. And if a bird ever got loose in your house, that was a signal to her that there was going to be a passing. And I can't tell you how many times that
Break a mirror,
happened, huh?
and when you break a mirror, also.
You break a mirror, depending on how big the mirror is, it's 7 years, and if it's a very big one, you could just be indefinite.
Should she have a funny example of her superstition, breaking a mirror? Or opening an umbrella.
Walking
or
under a
somebody
ladder,
doing it.
walking under a ladder, a black cat. All of these things I did. But, you know, it was still pounded into me, you know, you don't do that. But I owned a black cat. My mom never knew about that. Called it Cat Jinx.
Oh boy. So
But she was superstitious, yeah.
now when they got married, they built that house on Kenwood and White Street, right? And
Yeah,
he lived there
and the
until
house-
he died.
Yeah,
He
the
never
whole
moved.
life. The whole life.
And you grew up in that same house, obviously.
Yeah, if you want, yeah. I
I
was,
used to
I
cut the
was the
grass.
baby of the family. You got to remember, I lived in a crib my whole life.
We'll tell a crib story unless you want to tell it. You go ahead, you tell a crib story. I want to hear the crib story.
Well, the house was a very small house, much like when I mean, I'm back here. I'm in your house in Virginia right now, and I've just been up to see Washington up on Mount Vernon. And Mount Vernon, the house was small to begin with, and then he added wings on, and that's the way they kind of did things. As the need arose, you added on to your house. For anybody watching this tape, you probably, the zoning won't allow you to ever do it again, but in those days you could do those things and nobody gave you any static about it. And so Dad put on a couple of bedrooms. He didn't increase the furnace on the house, so they were cold.
I remember you
And
telling
then
me
there
those
was what we call the organ room, and that was
Now
kind of
that was new also.
huh?
The organ room.
Yeah.
It was like the entry.
Yeah, that was an add-on. That was an add-on.
Because see, I remember I used to cut that grass when I was what 10 to 12, and then we used to hoe his tomatoes, plant his tomatoes, water his tomatoes all summer
Yeah, but
long.
you'd cut it with electric or with a gas lawnmower. I had to do a pusher.
Yeah,
I had to push it.
yeah. It would be different. It would be
About
different.
a half acre, an acre of grass there.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about the crib. That's a funny story.
Well, I had two older sisters, and then I had an older brother. And of course, they were older by 10 to 16 years, depending on which one you want to talk about.
You were the baby of the family
I was the baby of the family.
by quite a few years, actually.
10 years, I said.
Yeah.
And so they each had their bedroom down on the other end, and then that left me with no bedroom, so I slept with Mom and Dad, and there wasn't room for a bed in there except a crib. And this is the truth. Till I was about 10 or 12, I slept in a crib in my folks' room. I am being told,
Hold on. Let me make sure you get who else.
no.
No. No.
Come on, Lisa, uncover your face. There we go. There's
It
Lisa.
wasn't 12, it was 6. It was 6.
Well, anyway, only thing I can tell you is I was tall enough that my feet would stick through the bars on the bottom. Okay? And I mean, I was longer than the crib was, and so my feet would stick through the bars, and Mom would have to cover me up, you know, and then she'd have to throw a blanket over my feet
Outside the bars.
outside the bars, outside the foot of the bars.
And you couldn't roll over because your one foot was.
No,
through one
I
bar.
always, if I start out on my stomach, I would stay on my stomach. If I start out on my back, because you can't turn over with your legs through the bars of the crib. Okay, so that's the crib story.
That's the funny story. That's a funny story. All right.
To this day, I still sleep with my feet over the edge of the bed. I can't stand to have my feet
You like them uncovered?
No, I like them covered up, thanks, but I, to this day, I don't, I like my feet over the edge of the bed. Okay,
You must slide down.
I do slide down.
Okay, tell us about, I know that Grandma always went where Grandpa was. They always
They were grafted
always,
together.
He was always, he had a new Cadillac, seemed like every year.
Well, one every year, but it was
Every other year. Every 3
more
years.
frequent.
And I never saw Grandpa without seeing Grandma in the passenger seat. In fact, well, there's a lot of stories.
Well,
I
if
could
they were
tell
ever
about Grandpa.
apart, they were within earshot of each other. They were always within earshot of each other, which I don't know. I had a lot of people ask me, wouldn't they get on their nerves? And they got along with it very well, but to some it might seem odd that they were that close. But when he would go to work, she'd go to work with him. Ladies wore hats in those days. She'd put a hat on,
Yeah.
ladies' hat on, and she'd go to work with him.
What I remember is we would go hoe tomatoes, and he'd have these crates. We'd put the tomatoes in the crates. We could probably get 5 or 6 crates picked in an afternoon on a Saturday. And I was what, 12, Dave was 14. I don't know if Tanya did it much. But he used to like to peddle those tomatoes to the local grocers in the valley. And I remember him sticking those tomato crates in the back seat of his car, and on the hood, and on the back, what do you got, the trunk lid of his car.
Oh, that was on
And he
a
would
that was on a busy
slowly
day.
drive down
He
to
would
the
put them on the
store,
roof of the car.
and
He'd
he-
hold on to the crate on the roof of the car. Okay.
Well, this is the oddity was the fact that it was a Cadillac, which was at the
Well,
time and still is a very,
let
very
me
nice
back up.
vehicle.
When in the early years, he liked Buicks, and so he had Buicks, and he drove Buicks and stuff. And then one day he got a Cadillac. Which year I don't know. I think it was in back 1958. He had a 1958 white Cadillac,
Okay.
which came from a business deal that he had with one of his business partners. If they would, if he would let them into the White City project, be a part of that, the Pap Nicholas's Magna investment would buy him a Cadillac of his choice, and that was when he first. In my recollection, that's the first Cadillac he had.
Give us a just give
Maybe he
us
had one earlier than that, a 56, a blue one. I don't know. 56, 58. The white Cadillac, though, that I'm talking about was a 58. I do remember that.
Okay. Just give us just a brief story of his business life. I know it's very difficult
It was
to
all
put that in a
business.
nutshell.
His business. Everywhere he went, it was business. In the trunk of his car, he had everything from a shovel to a toolbox with a screwdriver and a hammer for apartments or rentals that he had. That he had to fix a doorknob or
Fishing tackle.
yeah,
Tackle
and he's shotgun and he's 22 and you know he just fish and pole. If he saw a stream he wanted to fish on, he fished on it. He'd pull over and park and go fishing. It was very spontaneous.
Right. Well, I remember some of the quotes he used to say that that he felt that when it's time to smell the roses, I mean, smell the roses and enjoy life as you go about whatever it is you do. And so when you're saying he worked all the time, but it's kind of like while he was at work, he'd take 15, 20 minutes and fish a stream or something.
Well, yeah, he'd take time out. If it was something he wanted to do, he'd do it.
So he started out as a mail carrier, alternate. He was a florist for a while. How long was he a florist for?
Oh, forever. Seemed forever. My mother's mother, because she lost her husband to that, in that automobile
Right.
mishap.
Grandpa Spark.
Yeah. Dad, he thought, well, we'll give her something to do, and maybe she'd like flowers. And she loved flowers. And so Dad built a flower shop down on about 30 South and Highland Drive. And it was called White Floral, and there she had a cooler, and as a youngster, you know, Mason's age, I used to get dropped off there, you know, to be tended, you know, which was very boring for me, you know. There was nobody there to play with particularly except Grandma, you know. And she was always busy. She was either building, she was either making sprays or containers for, you know, for funerals, various things like that. And she was very good at flowers.
So he got into it because of her, or did he just have a natural interest?
I think he taught her how to make the arrangements. I know how to make a spray, and I know how to make a container, and that's where I learned it, is watching her arranging flowers.
Right.
And Libby Edward, one time they had this is in grade school, it was about fourth or fifth grade, they had a flower show. And us kids would make a flower arrangement, and we'd take it to school, and then they would judge them.
Right.
Well, I really didn't want to be bothered with that particularly, you know, so I told my dad, I said, you know, I got to have a flower arrangement, you know, to go to school with. Well, he quickly went outside, and he loved sweet peas. Of all of the flowers he ever liked, he liked sweet peas the most because they were a very delicate and a very hard flower to grow. You'd take scissors and nip the sweet peas.
Okay.
And he, anyway, he whipped together a container. And my container, I'm going to school, and I've got a big container I'm packing in, you know, and everybody else has got little flowers like this, you know. And interestingly enough, Judy Ng of Ng Floral,
Okay.
she was in the same situation. Her dad was in the floral business too. After my dad, of course. My dad was in the floral business before they were, but anyway, he put together. So they had to change the judging rules a little bit. The professionally done ones, you know, against the other, and so, but we won that. We beat the Ings with the flower arrangement.
I never heard that story. Never heard that story.
But it was, he always had flowers around his house. There was 10 acres or so, 15, 18, 20 acres, I don't know. A lot of, it seemed like a lot to me then because I was small and I had to go out for $5 a day and weeds, you know. And it seemed like, you know, when you got through hoeing flowers, it was a long day.
Tell us the story of when you were young and you were stuck selling flowers.
Was stuck. I liked it. That was my first. That was my first
flower selling assignment.
That was my decoration day. Naturally, is a big flower selling day, and Dad kind of made a family event out of it. And my brother-in-law is Herb Halliday, who's an attorney, and he would set up a flower stand. And Ward Jackson, my sister Joyce's husband, he had his place on Highland Drive that he liked to do his selling flowers. And I liked my place down there on Highland Drive in about 27, no, excuse me, about 28th South on Highland Drive. There was a big, I forget what they call it, big mansion that was on the corner.
Okay.
And they made it into apartments in there now and stuff, but it used to be just, I forget the name of the mansion now, escapes me, but it used to sit on the wall. And we had buckets out between the curb and the sidewalk.
Okay.
And it was a popular place on Decoration Day. Everybody who had extra flowers in their yard and stuff, they would go down and they would sell the flowers on the street. And that was what I did first. I sold flowers down there on Decoration Day. Kind of looked forward to it because got to handle lots of money, you know. Seemed like lots of money at then.
Tell me the story I remember you got stuck selling flowers at one point.
Stuck.
There's a story
I
where
didn't get stuck. I like
Joyce,
flowers.
Joyce or Gloria or whomever, they sent you on the corner selling flowers.
Oh, I raised, I mean, I didn't raise them, but I did flowers.
Okay.
It was a Decoration Day. Yeah, I mean, they might have been in Europe or out of town that particular time. I don't know which time you mean.
Okay. They're used to the time. Tell us more about in a nutshell. Well, not in a nutshell, but just kind of give us a chronology of Grandpa's work life and business life, and where he went from the mailman to the florist to, I know he started building homes on the portion
He
of the
always
white
had
block.
he always had a love for flowers.
And didn't he start the water company there on the white block, and kind of trying to get
Well, he
indoor
didn't start the
running water
company.
in the house and all that?
He didn't start the water company there, but he where Grandview Ward is, the white, what they call the white church up there,
And that's off of,
about 29th South and 20th East.
that's 20th East, okay.
And that was the closest where the water main was. And the white ditch also that came over from East Milford Canyon came right there. And in fact, they did baptisms in the ditch. I wasn't baptized in that ditch, but there were several that were.
Earlier, I guess.
They were baptized in the irrigation ditch. It was a pretty good sized ditch, but it wasn't Jordan River, no.
Right.
And that was where the city water was. And so Dad, he decided that he wanted water not only for his new home that he built for when he was first married. He picks and shovels. There were no backhoes in those days. No case backhoes, none with the tractor with a backhoe. That was unheard of. Any kind of trenching they did with picks and shovels. And so he dug a 4-inch line, which was pretty good size at that time. It's nothing now, but a 4-inch line, and started laying it on down several blocks to the west, and then turned and went over towards his mother's house, who was on the other end of the block. And he says it was all worth it after they all got through. Both, not only Dad did this, but Woodrow and Arnold and Duke, Dad's brothers, they helped with the project. and got the water down in there so that they could have pressurized water. And you say, well, how did they get water before that? Well, they got it out of a cistern, a very shallow well.
Okay.
And crank the pump and you get the water. And so, but anyway, now with this new line that was in, Dad had put plumbing in his house, and also his father had put plumbing in his house. But the plumbing never did ever work until that line was finally done, several years after the homes were built. And he says it was all worth it when he saw the tears come down his mother's cheeks when she turned on the tap and saw water come out of the tap for the first time. Because before that, she had to go out in the orchard, in the cistern, and
Be it winter or summer or.
yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Or get they brought water in sometimes on in barrels with a team of horses. Go down to the brickyard, interstate brickyard, which was a mile away or 2 miles away, and bring it up from the irrigation ditch. That was their water.
Things you take for granted today.
So that's his interest in water came, I think, from that. And he was
I'm gonna take a pause real quick.
okay.
Okay, you're on.
He-
You're on. What? What were you gonna say?
Well, got me in half of some. There are some parts I was going to go on some of those stories, but
We could if I had. We could go for hours
Oh,
on
yeah.
these stories. And I don't want to take away from some of the other stories because we only have so much time to do it in. But
well, Dad had an interest in water, obviously, from the getting water to his house. I don't know if that was the turning point that made him where he realized how valuable water was. Water was always valuable in the Great Salt Lake Valley. And at one time he owned almost all of the water that came out of Parley's Canyon and out of Neff's Canyon and East Mill Creek.
and that was county water systems.
No, that was him personally.
Okay, that was before then.
Yeah,
Before county.
before the county water system. And
Okay.
I started to work for the, well, the Mount Olympus spring water that you see, and this isn't it, but you'll see them in bottles like this
Yeah.
that come from the Mount Olympus spring water.
Yeah.
I wasn't there the day that the spring was found by no means, but I went up there and saw when it was about 1950, somewhere in there, in the 50s.
Okay.
Not 1898 like it says on the bottle that it's been around. It hasn't been around that long. But about 1950, when they blasted into the mountain, into Mount Olympus,
Okay.
and blew a hole in the mountain with explosives and then put a pipe in there. I believe it was a 6-inch pipe. And then A.J. Dean ready mix trucks went up there and they sealed the pipe in there and sealed off the elements from contaminating it.
Okay.
The blasting not only
So this wasn't like an artesian
well, the
well.
blast, no, it was a spring,
Okay.
but it developed the spring. It made it spring more. It had more volume after they got through blasting at it.
Okay.
And
I didn't know that.
and I helped lay the pipe with Dad and Welford Eglin and a few others down through there to get the spring down to a reservoir down lower, a reservoir that is still, to this date at least, in operation, still is the original It wasn't the tank, it was like a foundation on a house.
Okay, oh, okay.
And Dad basically put a floor joist on there and then put roofing paper on
Oh, okay.
it. And you make a pretty formidable tank of water with concrete. And later on, after the concrete, you know, concrete will crack occasionally and stuff, you know, here and there. Then they went in and he had a gunite like you would a swimming pool in there to seal off the cracks.
Oh, okay, okay.
But anyway, that, to this day, the roof may be different. It may be roofed different.
But that's how it comes out right now? That's still?
That's where it goes. That's still being used, to my knowledge. To my knowledge, to this day, it's still being used.
And that's up Neff's
And
Canyon,
the spring
right?
water is still being drawn from that source right there. Before, the state made him put a chlorinator there
Uh-huh.
in case it ever needed to be chlorinated. Well, it was always pure, and the chlorinator never ever had to kick on. It was pure water. And
Okay.
you'll hear stories, well, it's got chlorine in it, it's got a chlorinator on it. Yes, there's one there, but the chlorine never turned on, to my knowledge.
Hmm.
It was very pure, it had a very distinct flavor.
And that's at the base of Neff's Canyon, up where the knoll is, up there.
What was
Mount
called
Olympus, just above Mount Olympus Park, the top of Mount Olympus Park.
Mount Olympus Park was my dad's project. The
Right.
Cove was not. Mount Olympus Cove was
And
not.
that, the cove is the southern portion,
Mhm,
and the park is the northern,
mhm,
slightly older
Mhm.
portion.
mhm.
Tell the story about the knoll. I'd like to hear the story about the knoll and the partnership which he had.
Well, Dad had three partners. He had a partner named Carl B. Hale and a man by the name of Fulbert. I can't remember his first name, but Fulbert, the three of them were partners in the Mount Olympus Park.
Right.
And Mount Olympus Park had the Mount Olympus Spring water. So the same water that they sell in bottles for $2 a bottle, they used to water their lawns, but they still do today.
Yeah.
They're still watering the lawn.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, Dad took a TD-14 and came down, and he, in those days, they didn't do a lot of surveying and stuff. You know, they don't do like they do now. Not a lot of EPA and stuff. So he just, where he thought the road ought to go,
Yeah.
no stakes or nothing, he just took the TD-14 and cut out Parkview
That's
Drive.
like a bulldozer, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
an international bulldozer.
Okay.
And he pushed out a road called Parkview Drive. Parkview Drive was the first road up in there, and that was cut with a dozer, no survey stakes, nothing.
Is that where all of the roads kind of pair off from Parkview Drive?
No, that's just the,
That's one of the first ones.
that's the furthest one east.
Tell me the story how we got the
Then
knoll.
they
'Cause
sold
they
it.
all three wanted the knoll.
Okay, well, they created lots up in there, and they were quite good sized, large lots. And they picked 3 lots that were really nice lots, what they felt was the best. And they basically put the 3 lots in a hat, which they all wore. And they and they drew a number out of the hat. And Dad drew the number for the knoll, which was way up in the top, which was probably the nicest because it was the highest.
Right.
It's also the rockiest.
Right.
And there were rattlesnakes up in that area at the time when it was first done. They dissipated as people moved in, but it used to be lousy with rattlesnakes up there.
So he intended on building up there, and we know that, but he never did.
He had
actually
plans.
build
He had plans. I don't know where those plans ever got to. He had plans drawn up. Spent about $10,000 for a set of plans. If the house had ever been built, I'd have probably still been living there with, you know, with a nice
Well,
house.
and there's a picture of him in a pickup truck with Grandma and Grandpa sitting there
Yes.
in front of the
Yes.
entrance that says the White House
Yes.
on it. And so that's in reference to that picture.
Yes.
Okay. In fact, it's still there. Some of the stones have fallen off the concrete work, but to this date, it's still there. I drove up there and it's still there.
Well, yeah,
You
and
can kind
he,
of see it there. It's falling apart.
and he put concrete sidewalks all over the hill. It was kind of landscape first and then build a house when you get around to it.
Okay.
And he planted trees, pine trees and various things, and he, with a wheelbarrow,
That's a 5-acre knoll is what it is, right? I think it's a 5 acre.
something like that.
And then they subdivided it in like 1979, 1980.
And he sold off, but he kept the knoll up on top there. And then eventually somebody, he realized, I think, that he liked where he lived and he'd been there his whole life, and he just decided that he didn't want to move up there. He liked his farming, and up there you couldn't farm. It was
Yeah.
called Poverty Flats. You couldn't sink a plow on that rocky place up there for, there's no way you could farm it like he liked.
Quickly give us just the developments of what he had. A lot of this is recorded in the White Family Journal.
Mhm.
Just quickly give us the developments. Maybe we'll talk about Cedar Valley, because I don't think Cedar Valley was talked a lot about in the book. And then we'll kind of go to Cedar Valley and his interest out there. And what I'd like to know also is even some of the details about some of the legal disputes that I may not know or I may forget in the future, or, you know, kind of some of that. But we'll go to Cedar Valley in a little bit. Kind of tell us what he developed. So he started, I know, Canyon Rim.
Well,
Well, he
first of
started
all,
Imperial right around the homestead.
First of all, let me tell you the chain of events in the water companies. There was first Mount Up to Spring Water, then there was County Water System, and then there was White City Water, and then there was White Hills Water out in Cedar Valley. Now, I started when working at County Water System, but I was
You'd read the
about
meter.
40 some odd years ago.
You'd
When
read-
I was 16, I was working there, and I've continually been involved, if not on hands-on situation in water companies. I've served on the board or been affiliated with one of those water companies for 43, 44 years now, ever since I was 16. I was co-manager for County Water System with Marv Melville. And he and I, we read water meters, repaired water meters. It hasn't been my whole life. I worked as construction, as gravel pits and various things. But the water companies were still there. I did work for the water companies, putting in pipes, tanks, various things like that. Tank preparation, never built a tank. Never built a tank, but I am a welder. Learned that when I was 16. I did some welding on the water line and stuff.
So he really started development on the home side in Imperial, which is Homestead area. That was his first project.
Well, right after the war, White Avenue, Dad named, that was a subdivision of his, and he built all of the houses on White Avenue and on Xena.
Okay.
And some of them on Kenwood. Some of them, not all, but some. And they put in the water lines. It wasn't his water company. It was just extending existing water lines from Salt Lake City, I think. And did it with picks and shovels. They didn't do it with a backhoe. Consequently, the water mains aren't too deep.
Yeah.
Only about 2.5 feet deep.
Just below the frost level,
Yeah.
just enough to get out of that.
And then from there, White City Water, Liddell Harston did the managing of White City Water. He came to County Water System where I was working as manager. And Liddell wanted to know how to set up the books for the new water company called White City Water. And so he came in, I showed him the equipment that we had. We used not computers like we do now, but we had addressographs and posting machines and the older type billing and posting type machine. And I showed him about what he was going to need to set it up and how our postcards looked for sending the bills and the procedure we went through. So, but Liddell pretty much ran that. And I worked at County Water System, and then after the County Water System, we sold that, or Dad sold that. And I didn't go out to White City Water. I was doing some concrete batching with my brother, White Concrete Products, for a few years. And then I went into construction and I dug basements, had cats, backhoes, and 2 crushing spreads.
No, one was at the point of the mountain, one was in Kearns.
One was at Point of the Mountain, the other one was in Kearns at 3621 West 5400 South. And that was our Kearns plant. Primarily made road base out of there. And all of the aprons at the Salt Lake International, the asphalt, the aggregates came from my pit for the Salt Lake International Airport.
I forget about that. I forget about that. I forget.
We used to load 600 trucks a day out of there. It's a lot of trucks, semis.
Yeah,
We had
belly
four,
dumps and
we
dump
had,
trucks and-
we had, during that project, we had both crushers in there. 2 LJ 45-inch cone crusher. And they were crushing plants that I helped design. They were portable, they were on wheels, but they were very formidable. They'd make about 200 tons an hour. So that's 400 ton an hour.
Right.
Good money in those days. Road base was 80 cents a ton. Now it's about $3.
Tell us about, there was a story I remember about Grandpa when he used to sell hay from Cedar Valley in a barn that was located on the corner of his lot.
Yeah.
And he'd go through great lengths and effort to sell 1, 2, 3, 4 bales of hay. And what, $2 a bale, $3 a bale?
It was the flowers instinct in him. He liked farming, he liked flowers, he liked meeting people, he liked having something available to perform some service for somebody who had a horse or something of that nature. And he would sell hay out of a little barn that he had there.
It was no
And-
bigger than my living room. Or my
If
family
that.
room here. If that.
Your living room here is bigger than the
Yeah.
barn was. But we used to, he asked me if I would come out and run the farm, so I said, well, yeah, I'll go out and run the farm. I kind of wanted to raise some horses and one thing and other, so he says, why don't you run the farm while you're out there? And that worked for me and it worked for him. So I went out and I used to send a couple of truckloads a week into that little barn. The
Right.
guys would unload the truck, put it in the barn, kept loading that little barn. A lady one time who was one of his competitors came out to the farm where we had the big 30,000 square foot hay building, full of hay, and asked whose hay that was, and it was, and I says, well, it belongs to Mr. White. She says, that's how he's able to keep that little barn so full of hay. I says, oh yeah, we send him 2 or 3 truckloads a week in there, and he sells them, you know. But she could never figure out how he could,
Where you got his hay from.
yeah, where he got his hay from, and he had an endless supply of it.
Now, there was a thief at one time that
Yes.
tried to steal his rings.
Yeah,
Tell us about that story.
this ring on my finger is his ring. This isn't the one that he got stolen, but the horseshoe ring is mine, and then his ring is the one that's on my little finger. He had a ring similar to it. This is the one that the insurance company, I believe, replaced. And at 10 o'clock at night, people would come to the house and they would want hay for their horses. And he was a very trusting individual. He hardly ever locked a door.
Well, who did back then?
Huh?
There wasn't many people that did back then.
No. And one particular night, I was working for the Salt Lake City Police Department at the time, and I was coming home that night, and I stopped by to see how he was, or, you know, just say hello. I was on the way home. And I was in uniform, and I noticed a whole bunch of lights flashing around, and somebody had got him up there in the barn and cornered him and took what cash he had on, you know, money he had on him from, and his ring. They took a pistol, a handgun, and he clenched his hands like this to not let them get a hold of the ring and take the ring off his finger. And they kept hitting his hand with the handgun until he had to relax, and they got his ring and got the deal and hit him over the head and left him there.
That was in that bar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
After that, his whole life changed. He was like Fort Knox there. He had ADT,
I remember.
alarm systems, and everything else, and it completely changed his whole demeanor. He got to where he wasn't quite as trusting. He had to be a little more careful.
Yeah. I remember the security system that was put in.
Oh yeah. It was all time going off.
Yeah, yeah.
Always false alarm.
I remember that. Tell us about his entrance into Cedar Valley, and just kind of give us maybe 10 or 15 minutes of the important stuff about Cedar Valley.
The years there, it took me.
What year did he go into Cedar Valley, roughly? Of course, that's west of Lee.
I'd want to say somewhere around in the 60s, 50, somewhere between 55, 58, somewhere between 55 and 1960, 62, somewhere in there would be my best guess.
And I remember he used to raise buffalo there.
Well, I helped him clear a lot of sagebrush off, and the farm is there's 2,000 acres. The farm, the Cedar Valley ground out there is roughly 2,000 acres, 1,800 acres out there. And he drilled a couple of wells, and he was successful in getting 2 nice large wells. And then after that, he drilled more, and he got more wells. And but there's 2 irrigation wells that were there.
Yeah.
And he raised hay. At first, it was just turn the wells loose, let them water where they could water, and
It was flood irrigation.
yeah, 1,500 acre or 1,500 gallons per minute of water coming at you. You know, it's pretty hard to flood irrigate with something like that unless you.
Right.
So, and eventually, over a period of years, he was able to put it in under a sprinkling system. And the
No, there's
sprinkling system.
35 wheel lines, because they were all numbered. And including on up by the barn, your place, it was 35, because I had to change them every day in the summer. And there was a total of 35. They numbered them starting out the church block, the main county road that links 73 going towards Eagle Mountain.
Right now, there's
Eagle
about
Mountain.
18.
Yeah.
But you are right. But the reason was that there could be that additional. The two main wells in the farm would handle about 9 lines apiece, 18 lines. But the cook well, what we call a cook well,
We had booster wells too, or whatever. I don't know if that helped.
well, that's counting the booster.
Okay.
The cook well was a nice well too, and it would handle another.
Did that
10
supplement
lines.
that when we were changing those lines?
And
They
we
actually had
used-
3
and-
wells.
And we used that. We used it because the subdivision, there wasn't houses there at the time. There was only 2 or 3 houses up there. So we used the water from the cook well to irrigate the farm as well.
Okay.
Now that we're using the water from the cook well for the culinary purposes for the subdivision as it presently constituted, the 2 wells down, the 2 large wells down in the farm are the only wells that can irrigate the farm right
How deep is that cook well?
now. 650 feet,
And the 2 wells down there in the fields,
about the same.
about 650 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Grandpa bought the well permit from our cook, right? And I know that there's some question as to how much he was given a,
Oh, well, the cook well, I don't know which number that one was. That was the 3rd or 4th or 5th well that was drilled. There was the 2 big wells, well 1 and 2. Number 1 being the one furthest to the north is number 1, and then the one
okay,
to the south of that was number 2. And then there was some little smaller wells that were drilled up by the house, up by the homestead, what I call a homestead. And they took care of the homestead, the immediate needs there. But the irrigation wells, they did the farm. And the cook well, the water right that was on that, I'm not sure how on the. I was real young at the time.
right. Anything about that ranch? Yeah, I mean, because there's legal issues, and there's, with Fairfield, and, there's a lot written about it and already talked about, and we have newspaper clippings on there. Anything that's pertinent that you want to make sure we know, in case someone forgets or misunderstands, or the family could be taken advantage of because someone doesn't record it or know the facts about.
Well, the water right that's in Cedar Valley is a very technical one. It was reviewed by the Supreme Court of the state of Utah twice. And one would need to, it's a book, published book, that is the court ruling, and in there one should read that. That would give the particulars as to what can or can't be done there.
Okay.
There have been wet years, dry years. Right now, in, what is it, 2004, it's been a dry cycle, so we haven't been able this year to be doing much water. So the irrigation wells have been off. And the reason they have to be off is that we have to maintain the Fairfield spring at a given level, which that book will tell you what that is. 0.024 or something like that.
Okay.
Measurement. There's a measuring device over at Fairfield. And that measuring device is to be kept operable and be read regular. And right now it's being watched by the ones who are leasing it. That's Grant Smith, Cedar Valley Farms. That's
Okay.
Grant Smith. Kerry Smith's supposed to be reading that.
Why did Grandpa go out there to Cedar Valley? What was his interest out there?
He always liked farming. As
As I remember, I mean, who was it? Some of the workmen that he would hire out there didn't know how to plant or grow anything, and I remember sometimes he'd get frustrated. He'd go out there, he'd have his
well, he
suit,
wasn't
his tie,
frustrated
gown,
at all.
dress pants, and he'd go out there and show them how to make a straight furrow and how to plant something.
Dad always used to have a saying that if you starve to death on a farm, it's your own fault. Only he was a little more emphatic than that. And it's true. If you do not have you should learn the techniques and talents of farming or gardening, so that given seeds, Dad always had seeds around, vegetable seeds as well as flower seeds. I have some of his original seeds somewhere, which I'm scattered all over right now, as you know.
Yeah.
But I have some of his original seeds for his flowers.
Hmm.
But alfalfa, onion seed, you should, of course, he liked raising tomatoes.
That probably was his favorite.
Yeah. But it wasn't uncommon for me to go down in the farm down there and find 20 acres of onions. Now, who needs 20 acres of onion?
Well, the unfortunate thing is sometimes people didn't catch the vision that he had, and you know, they didn't use them. They let the weeds take them over, and
Oh, it was all time giving stuff away, but he
Yeah.
liked to grow it. He liked to keep his skills. He liked to hone his skills. He liked to hone his skills by raising a tomato, usually 10 acres, patch of tomato. And sometimes he would pick them if he had time. If he didn't, he would let people pick their own and let them have them at a discount price, so it was worth their time to pick them. And they were very tasty tomatoes. They were, I don't know, it's been a long time since I had really good tomatoes. His tomatoes,
yeah. What else can you tell us about Grandpa or Grandma that you think would be of interest? We've probably got what, 10 minutes on the tape that that'd be of interest.
what else? I could go on and on and on. I spent a long time with them, but
Yeah.
you'd have to help me
I'm trying to think. Hold on.
refresh my memory of what you want.
So he had, there's May 5th is a commemoration of Edward White's brother, who was drowned in the North Sea in Europe.
Bottom England, yeah.
Yeah. And so the family, he started doing flag raising ceremonies, which in the middle of the White Block, I think probably behind.
It wasn't
Your
in the middle.
grandpa's home.
It wasn't in the middle. My grandfather had a flagpole, and it's still there to this day. They went up in the mountains, up in the East Mountains up there, and they picked a very straight pine tree, and thus got a flagpole. And I believe that pole, the original pole, is what's there. Is it's the one that was originally
Still
got.
there.
And then later on, they built another pole up by Bertie White's up there in the middle of and now they have flag raising up there. But the first flag raisings I remember was at my grandfather's home, 5th of May.
And so what that did is that started to create a tradition of family reunions at that
There
time.
was family reunions, we would go to flag raising. Us as kids, I can remember whoever showed up at the flagpole on the morning of the 5th, which was before sunrise, we all would usually sleep out so that we could, you know, head over there in the middle of the night. Whoever was there, whatever grandchild was there first at the flagpole got the honor of running up the flag.
Oh, okay.
And so the White family was always flag oriented because of the coming from Boston, England, and coming to this country for
The benefits and the
yeah,
freedoms and the.
yeah. And I don't think I ever got up early enough that I ever was first. I don't think I ever got to raise the flag. But there was a time I played trumpet, and I would play reveille along with Wynn Egan and a couple others would play reveille.
I just remember we used to have family reunions at the chapel there, and it filled the whole chapel.
Well, yeah, that
I
in the
remember
morning
going as a
on the
boy,
morning
and I
of
never
the
recognized anybody except for my immediate cousins. However, they were loaded with second cousins on
Yeah.
my level.
First
cousins
It got
for you.
immense. Got immense. As time went along, it got immense, as you can imagine. But the Grandview Ward, we would fill the gymnasium just with the immediate ones. Now it takes a stake center and maybe even more than that.
Yeah, yeah.
But some of the old gentlemen, brothers of my grandfather, were over 100 years old. Uncle Henry lived to be 102, 3, something like that. Very old longevity. And they would be there, and at night, on the night of the 5th, they would have a family reunion. And sometimes it was catered, sometimes later on you brought your own lunch, or you brought your own dinner.
Right.
Because it got to be quite, you know, as it got larger and larger, as the families grew and expanded, it got to be to where it was.
I think they backed it off one generation right now.
Somewhere I have a tape of one of those reunions.
Yeah.
And each year they would trade off. Marsh's family would run the program, then my dad would run it, who was a brother, and Woodrow's family would, and then Bertie's family would, and then Gwen's family would. And so about every 4th or 5th year, they would take turns hosting the program and putting on whatever it was. And the last year that I remember, I videotaped it, and somewhere in my films that tape lies. I've seen it, I know it's there.
Yeah.
I just can't say where it is out of the moment. But it shows my dad and my mom, and we all had parts on the program.
I think I've got pictures of it. There's a skit. I've seen the pictures. I've recently scanned them, and they're on that CD.
Maybe you've got them, and that's why I don't know where they're at.
That's probably, but I know I've scanned them, and I do have them on digital CD.
Okay, well,
tell us about, now this kind of gets, I was trying to keep it more oriented toward grandma and grandpa at first. Maybe this is kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but that probably is. But I wanted to know a little more about Kenny, Wayne, and Dougie. The threesome, the boys that grew up together on the White Block. Of course, all from
Well,
they were cousins.
We were cousins, and we were close in age. Wayne was the oldest. Then Douglas was 3 months. Wayne was 6 months older than I was. Wayne was not Marcia's oldest. Wayne was Marcia's second oldest boy. Wynn Egan being the oldest. Anyway, Wayne was 6 months older than I was. Douglas was about 3 months older than I was, and consequently, the three of us, we played a lot together in the orchard. Like I said, it was a very rural setting, and the orchard was our life. It was pretty nice to be able to go get a peach when you were hungry, you know, or cherries, or you know.
You had a funny story where you'd always call Grandpa's name out, Han. The old
Well,
Han.
yeah, my grandfather's name was Han, and his hearing wasn't the best. And so grandmother White, she would holler, "Oh, Han!" And you'd hear him go, "Yo!" And he'd come down to the house. That was the way she called him. They didn't have walkie-talkies in those days and all these things that they have, gadgets now. No cell phone, none of that. So us kids, we would hide in the orchard and we'd holler, "Oh, Han!" And he'd go, "Yo!" And he'd go down to the house. And we did this about 3 or 4 times. Pretty quick he realized that somebody was fooling around with him, see. And so he decided, well, I don't know who's doing this. But anyway, we had a little bit of fun, innocent fun with him. But
That's the only way I remember his first name is because of that story.
well, and we used to get up in the cherry trees, you know, and I swear the man either was blind or he wanted to be blind. But we would be just gorging ourselves with cherries. And they were immense cherry trees. They were very, very big cherry trees. And how he could walk underneath and be right underneath us, you know, and us up there just hanging on to a little branch trying to look insignificant, and him not ever see us, I'll never know. I know he knew we were there. But he didn't. I'm sure he didn't care that we were having the cherries. He just didn't want us to damage the trees or get hurt, fall out of the tree,
Yeah.
which we did on a regular basis.